And we are live with another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside once again by Andrew Johnson. And Andrew, I've got to admit, it's been our busiest week, probably in our entire podcast's history. Our fourth episode we are recording as of this weekend, with right doing so. We had NFL and college football to recap this past weekend, as well as recapping the entire MLB regular season going into Wildcard weekend. And boy, a big emphasis on Wildcard weekend because a lot of stuff went down. The Wildcard series is officially over as of last night. Tomorrow we will have the first matchups of the AL and NL Divisional series, and a lot to talk about and break down as terms of the Wildcard series and how those series went down.
Yeah, an absolute chaotic week in baseball. Hard to imagine winning 90 plus games and your season ending in two of them.
Yeah.
That is very rough. If you were sitting there as division favorites for say 5-6 months out of a season, and then all of a sudden you don't get the bye, you don't win the division, and your season ends in two games, that's a tough pill to swallow if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, it really comes down to momentum sometimes when it comes down to these series. The teams that are riding the hot hand have known to be the teams that you don't want to face off in the playoffs, even if you win a division title, because you're one of those wild card teams. You're scrapping and clawing for wins down the stretch of the season, and then you get into the postseason and you just keep going on that wave of momentum that you've been going on the last couple of weeks. And we have certainly seen that these so far in this MLB postseason, which now for the teams that had their respective buys going into the divisional series, they've got to be a little bit worried facing some of these teams that are coming off some thrilling wins in their respective wild card series. So anything else to add, Johnson, before we start recapping what went down in the wild card series this past week?
Yes, baseball is a sport of beauty because this is the only sport you will see where you could have an $18 million payroll and make it deep into October. Excuse me. I don't know why I said March.
You think it's some college basketball early?
I am getting around that time.
It's not March yet. You can't say this is March yet. Almost there. Maybe just a little bit of time. But as I mentioned, it has been a very chaotic week for us here. And with, I'm all for it. This is the busiest time of the entire sports year and calendar year with the NFL and college football seasons currently going on. And then you have the MLB postseason currently going on. And not too far around the corner, the NBA season is going to be coming up. So we'll be sure to recap, or I shouldn't say recap, but preview what will go down in this season's NBA year in just the next couple of weeks. But let's start it off with our first wildcard series that we had this week. And one of the more surprising series that we saw this happen this past week. And that was between the Detroit Tigers and the Houston Astros. The Tigers, phenomenal pitching weekend for them in this series. A team that at one point, Johnson, was 10 games under 500 early in August, and it looked like their season was done. They rallied to go 31-13, as I mentioned in our last MLB episode, to go down the stretch of the season and make it in to the MLB postseason. They get matched up with the Houston Astros, and a familiar matchup for AJ Hinch, obviously the former Astros manager that was ousted after the whole sign stealing scandal. He now is the Tigers manager and does a great job with this team getting into the postseason with the roster on hand that you wouldn't really expect off the top of your hand to think about. This team is not a postseason roster if you look at it first glance. And they have made it now to the ALDS as they sweep the Houston Astros in 2 games in Houston as they win game 1 by a final of 3-1. Strong pitcher performance from Tariq Skubal, the favorite to win the AL Cy Young. 6 brilliant innings from him, a shutout baseball. They got some key hits as well in this game to hold on for that 3-1 victory. And then, as of Wednesday, a thrilling Game 2 victory that got them the sweep. They took an early lead off a home run. They gave up the lead in the 7th inning due to some costly errors, but in the 8th inning, were able to tie the game on a wild pitch. And then Andy Ibanez with a pinch hit, bases clearing, 3-run double, brings home all 3 runs for the Tigers, gives them the 5-2 lead, and they would not surrender that 5-2 lead. They win that game 2 5-2. They now advance to the American League Divisional Series, and they will take on a familiar opponent, their division rivals, the Cleveland Guardians.
This is absolutely crazy to think about if you're a Tigers fan, because I said this earlier. The they're a below 500 team when you take out all the other teams, not including the White Sox. So they went below 500 against every other MLB team, not named the White Sox. So this is crazy because I said they didn't deserve to be here. Clearly, they've proven me wrong, and that's the beauty of baseball, like I said. And you do have that layer of the former Astros manager eliminating his old team. You know that has to feel good. Are we sure they're not stealing signs? There's been no sounds of trash cans. There's no banging sounds. There's nothing going on over in Detroit, right?
Not that I know of.
Yeah, not that we know of yet because they haven't played a game at home. But that's just, I mean, obviously that's just a little joke. But it's just crazy to think about how far this team has come, because even guys that earlier in the year, like Spencer Torkelson, he's contributing now because he had a
Right.
very very poor start of the year, and I guess here he is now. He's scoring runs and he's getting on base, so good for him. I guess even though he doesn't have a single hit, he's got on base. He's got on base
Good
twice, and he
defense
has
he
a
had in
run.
this
So
series. Yeah.
yeah, and he had great defense. So even though he's been struggling to get on base, to hit the ball, he's scoring. He scored a run, and he got on base twice. So that's a good. Or got on base 3 times. Excuse me. That's all you could really ask for.
I think the beauty of this Tigers roster is, you look at their lineup and they don't really have a superstar player in that lineup. Green is probably their best hitter. I guess if you had to pick one in that entire lineup, but they're just kind of like a well balanced team to where they're getting key timely hits, and you kind of saw it in that game 2 win. But the other beauty of this team is Johnson is their pitching, which has been a big bright spot for them this season. We know how good Tariq Schoolball is, and that's why he's going to win the Cy Young Triple Crown in all statistical categories for the American League. But in game 2, they went with a bullpen game, and the bullpen did a phenomenal job. Other than that one inning where the 2 missed timely plays in the field, where they had Jackson Jobe, their rookie, on the mound, even with that happening, the Tigers bullpen did a phenomenal job in this game. They allowed just 5 hits in that second game with that entire bullpen being thrown, and they were able to get the victory 5-2. So they're going to go with the bullpen game again. The same exact star that they threw in game 2 will start in game 1 for them, that being Tyler Holton. So he will start game 1 against the Guardians. So that gives you an indication that they'll be going bullpen again once again to start off the ALDS. And then they'll go back to Schoolball for game 2. So if they're able to pull off a win in game 1 with the bullpen and give the ball to Schoolball in game 2, the Tigers realistically have a great chance to make it to the ALCS in this postseason.
Yeah, you just have to really tip your cap at the end of the day. They've had a phenomenal turnaround, and maybe they'll keep on proving me wrong. Who knows? We'll find out.
And before we go into the next series, Johnson, I don't know if you knew this stat beforehand, but this will now be the first time since 2016 that the Astros will not be representing the AL
I
and
did
at
know that.
least the ALCS. So there's a little bit of history as
I
well.
think
It's
they've
been a
been there in
while.
the seven. I think it's 7 of the 8 last years.
I believe
So
so, yeah.
yeah, that does check out. I didn't know the
7
exact
straight, and
date, but
then
that
even
that makes
before that.
sense.
Yeah, it's crazy to think. I knew they were so dominant these last couple of years, and obviously, being a Yankee fan, I've seen it. Fortunately, come against us, but that streak finally ends. They're going into the offseason where it looks like Alex Bregman's probably gone, so we'll see what entails for them going into the offseason. But yeah, I mean, crazy to think the Tigers were able to pull this off. But then again, Johnson, they were not the only AL Central team to do what they did this past weekend. How about we talk about the Kansas City Royals and what they did to the Baltimore Orioles this past week, as they also pull off a stunning 2-0 sweep over Baltimore. And this series came down to Baltimore for the second straight season, Johnson, unfortunately not being able to hit, especially with runners in scoring position. Last year, if you remember, against Texas, the biggest problem for the Orioles was their offense was just not getting key timely hits in certain situations against the Rangers, and that's what unfortunately eliminated them last year. The same exact thing happened in this series against the Royals. Cole Reagan's phenomenal start in game 1. The bullpen did a great job as well. Bobby Witt Jr., of course, he has the only RBI in this game for Kansas City. They get a 1-0 win in game 1. Game 2, we saw the Royals jump out to an early 1-0 lead of a Vinny Pasquantino RBI single. Good to have him back in the lineup considering he was out for the majority of the season. Cedric Mullins would tie the game in the 5th inning with a home run, but then just 1 inning later, again, it's Bobby Witt with the go-ahead RBI single. He puts the Royals up 2-1. The Royals bullpen would hold on to that 2-1 lead, and they win game 2 by that final of 2-1. They sweep Baltimore, and now they are going to the American League Divisional Series, and they will take on my New York Yankees in the ALDS.
A lot of people don't realize this is the true rival game. It's not Astros Yankees. Astros Yankees of the last decade, sure, but if you want to talk about the 70s, 80s, you want to
Yeah,
talk
this
about
is a
the
this is a big
historical
rival in the
rival,
70s, 80s.
because the Kansas City Royals were a farm team for the Yankees. Uh, the George Brett incident, who was that against, Nick?
That was against the Yankees, Pine Tar.
It's against the Yankees. So you got the Pine Tar incident, it's against the Yankees. So you got to remember
Chris
that
Chambliss hit
these
a
teams.
walk-off home run. I didn't mean to cut you off. He hit the home run against the Royals in the 1976 ALCS to send the Yankees to the World Series that year.
Yeah, so you got to think for a couple decades, these teams had real history, and we know it's kind of been subsided over the last couple of years,
Yeah.
or less, maybe 20 years or so. But historically speaking, this is one of our Yankees' biggest rivals, so I'm looking forward to this.
It's the first time they're meeting in the postseason since 1980, so it has been a very long time since these two teams have faced off in the playoffs, and that's for a couple of different reasons. The Yankees in the late 80s, early 90s were kind of on the downside. The Royals in the early 2000s, when the Yankees were winning their titles, were on a very bad streak. Now, keep in mind, these two teams have the same amount of rings in the 2000, 2010s era, just one for each team. The Royals winning back in 2015, the Yankees back in '09. So, these two teams are trying to get over the hump. It's been a little bit of time since they've won a world championship. And, as a Yankee fan seeing this Royals team, I think anything is realistically possible the way this postseason has currently
It's
gone.
a
I
very
think,
likable team. This is
yeah,
a likable team. It's not like the Astros where they were
right.
playing the bad guy. Unfortunately, Nick, your Yankees are playing the bad guy this year,
No, I
this time
mean,
around. So you got cheer for the heel, but
and
I don't.
the American League, the Yankees right now are by far the team that everyone wants to see them lose because you look at the other three teams that are left. You have the Tigers, who've been a scrappy team that everyone has really liked, even with the manager that they have. They're everyone's pretty much looking past that at this rate because the Tigers are a fun team to watch. The Royals are the same thing. Once you have a very likable guy in Bobby Witt Jr., that's an MVP candidate. We know he is. It's funny enough that him and Judge are going to be playing each other in the ALDS. The top two vote getters for the AL MVP this season, most likely, are now going to face each other for a trip to the ALCS. And then even the Guardians, they're still a team that you could root for. Obviously, they're a team just trying to get over the hump. They have not been able to get a championship since I think the 1940s, I think was the last time they won. And obviously, they had that heartbreak back in 2016 against the Cubs. So they're a team that everyone would like to see win as well. So the Yankees have always been known to be, quote unquote, the evil empire, as people want to, sometimes mention them as. I'm not surprised. It's not, I'm not surprised that everyone's going to root against them, especially now with the four teams remaining in the AL. So we'll have to see what they do. It's going to be a very interesting series. As a fan, I am a little bit nervous. I think the Royals could definitely provide a good challenge for the Yankees in this series. I think they should
And
not take them for granted,
there's
but
there's
we'll
an
see how it goes.
underlying storyline here too that people aren't paying attention. With the Royals' resurgence potentially with Bobby Witt Jr., that young star, 10 years from now, over the next decade, you mean Judge isn't going to be there 10 years from now.
It
Judge
is,
probably 5-6 years now. That's not going to be his team. If the Yankees do sign Juan Soto, and I know we can go into the Yankees Royals later on.
Hmm.
If the Yankees do sign Juan Soto, right, and Bobby Witt is there, and he's going to be if he's a lifer there, this could be the rebirth of this great series that they had in the '70s and the '60s and a little bit of
The
the
80s,
'80s.
yeah.
Because when you think of all-time Kansas City Royals, it's George Brett, and that's pretty much it. I know they have some other great players. They had Brett Saberhagen there. They had Carlos Beltran for a minute. They had
Alex
Salvador
Gordon.
Perez, Alex
They still
Gordon.
have they still have Salvador Perez, funny
Yeah,
enough,
I mean, but
still.
yeah, man, funny enough, it's not like he's getting any younger. He's what, about
Oh, yeah, no,
30,
he
35?
he's I think he's 34 or 35, something like that.
Yeah, so I know he was an
He's up
all-star
there.
this year, but he's on his way out with this franchise, and not that's just the way it is. But you you really don't have many guys in the top 20 you can think, "Oh yeah, he's like an all-time great player." Uh where you can do that for a lot of franchises, like as much as you don't like them, the Red Sox, you can do that. You can do that for the Yankees. You can do that for the Dodgers. Even the Mets are a top 20. You can think of a lot of players. So it's going to be really interesting here going forward because I want to see that Bobby Witt Juan Soto in the early 30s, 6, 7 years from now when the teams are really going, hopefully. And it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a comeuppance. This is going to be like this may be the series to watch of the 2020s as time
Yeah.
goes on.
Well, I mean, listen, there's another team on the other side of the barrel that would like to get Juan Soto, and we'll talk about them in just a little bit of time. But Bobby Witt, remember, is on that big extension that he got in the offseason, so he is a Royal for pretty much it seems to be the rest of his entire career. So if there is a player to get this team back into a resurgence, it's certainly Bobby Witt. He showed it in this series against Baltimore, and we'll see now what he does. Hopefully, for my sake, it doesn't as big of an impact against the Yankees, but I'm sure he will play an impact in this series. But before we go to the next series, Johnson, any final thoughts on Baltimore and where they now go from here? This is the second straight season that they have been in this spot where the offense was just irrelevant. They had a lot of injuries that plagued them at the end of the season as well. But really concerning to me that they are not able to hit so far in this postseason. And they have a lot of great young hitters, but maybe having this many young hitters in your lineup is proving to be a big, I don't want to say a bad thing, but
It's a detriment right now, and
yeah,
it's because
it
they're so
seems
young.
like
They
it.
don't have that experience. This is going to sound crazy because they have so many good young players, but I think they need to trade a couple of them, maybe one or two. And I think the odd man
They're
out
gonna have
here,
to soon, honestly.
I think there's a couple guys out of the odd man out here, and I'm going to kind of name as much as I like him. Heston Kjerstad, he's an odd man out right now.
Yeah,
Because they're not going to trade Anthony Santander, they're not going to trade Cedric Mullins, they're not going to trade Colton Cowser. It seems like that's
I
going to be
wouldn't be
their core
surprised if Mullins
outfield.
gets traded. He's getting up there. He's getting up there in age.
I mean, he's getting up there in age, but it's not football. He just turned 30 years old, so like
Right,
they've
right.
got a couple of years to compete with him. Unless they think Kerstad is ready to go next year over Mullins, which they could believe that, and if that's the case, then Mullins is the odd man out here. But they're gonna have to trade probably one of Heston Kerstad and Cedric Mullins. They're gonna have to trade Jordan Westberg, because that infield is just so stacked. They have
There's just too
Adley's
many
not going
players.
anywhere.
Yeah,
Jackson Holiday, he's the guy of the future. They have Gunnar Henderson. He's an MVP candidate.
yeah.
Uh,
They were hoping that he would have a good series against Kansas City, but he was
and
just
Mountcastle
unfortunately
seems to be the
irrelevant.
guy that keeps on coming back. He starts off really hot, then he slows down, then he picks it up towards the end of the season. He's never really gonna impress you, but he's also never going to demand that high of a contract. So I feel like they hold on to a guy like that, someone who's just kind of safe to play at first base. But there's a couple guys here, and I think they're gonna maybe take a couple of the younger guys. So let's say they trade Kerstad and Westberg, and let's say Cedric Mullins, and they can get a legit outfielder. Let's say I don't want to say like a Mookie Betts type player, but anything is really possible in
It
baseball.
really
We've
depends
kind
on
of learned
what's
that.
available in free agency, but yeah.
Connor Nor, I mean they already traded Connor Norby earlier in the year, so it's kind of showing you they want to get a little bit
I think
more
that's my
mature.
concern with them is that they have a good like the outfielders, maybe the mix of where you see a little bit more veteran, on the roster, guys like Santander and Mullins, but the rest of the line was very young. And it's not like their pitching was the problem in the series. Their pitching did phenomenal. Corbin Burns
No,
was a stud
absolutely
in
not.
game one. Zach Eflin was fine in game number two. They went for the bullpen the rest of the way, and they did fine in that game. But obviously you're going to get Felix Bautista back next season, but they really need
They get
more.
Grayson Rodriguez back too.
Right, and they really could have used him probably too, especially if they probably would have started him in game number two. And it's not that it gets Eifler, but
I don't know if
Eifler
they
could
would
have
have
been
started
used.
him. I know he definitely would have been like a long reliever
Yeah,
type player.
it would have been tough to go between the two, but I think for Baltimore, it's going to come down to what's in the free agent market, maybe what's on the trade market, and then they're going to have to decide on who is expendable and who can we get rid of at this rate because you can't really because the problem also for them, Johnson, I think is another factor which maybe affects them in free agency is going to be some of their guys that they have now are going to be expiring contracts soon because of their rookie deals. So they're going to have to pay these players soon, and they might not have the payroll to do that. So that might be another issue for them going in the next couple months. So I think that's something to watch out for in the off season for this team is are they going to try to maybe go all in next season because they know that their window is maybe kind of closing in sooner rather than later because of the payroll that they currently have for their entire roster?
Yeah, so that's
So,
why they're going to have to really commit to some of these guys, because they're not going to pay all of them.
right.
They're not going to pay every single
You
one of them.
can't.
So at a certain point, something's got to give.
Well, speaking of a team that's pretty much going all in for this season, I would assume that's what the motto of this San Diego Padres team has been so far this season. And we saw what they did at the deadline, getting all those relievers. We saw them getting Luis Arias earlier on in the year as well. And they did trade Juan Soto away in the offseason, but it has really paid off for them, and especially has showed in this series against the Atlanta Braves. Game one, they got Michael King going, the former Yankee who they got in the Soto trade. Phenomenal start, the best start probably in the entire playoffs so far. 7 innings, 5 hits, no runs, 12 strikeouts in that game. A strong performance of him. Kyle Higashioka, who they also got in the Juan Soto trade, hit a home run and had 2 RBIs in the game one victory. Padres go on to win game one 4-0. In game number two, Higashioka would also get another home run, so he already has 2 home runs in this postseason mark. It looked like for a second that maybe the Padres were in jeopardy of blowing this game in game number two. They had an early 5-1 lead. It got down to 5-4 in the later stages of that game. But I mentioned that bullpen they traded for at the trade deadline was a huge factor into them holding on to that 5-4 lead, and they would win it by the final score of 5-4. So the Padres do sweep the Atlanta Braves, the third straight series that we had a sweep in this wild card series. And now, Johnson, once again, this Padres team goes into a matchup with a division rival, the Los Angeles Dodgers.
Yeah, everyone saw this coming with the Braves, the way they collapsed towards the end of the season and how the Padres kind of rose
Too
from the
many
ashes.
injuries.
Yeah, they had too many injuries, and the Padres are getting hot at the right time. So I said that these two would be the hot teams, and I kind of went against myself with these picks. And like I said, I think I said the Astros and the Orioles would have won, and those teams are kind of teams that were on the downturn, unfortunately. So those weren't the hot teams. I guess the Tigers and the Royals were the hotter teams at that point. And spoiler alert, Padres have been one of the hottest teams. It's not the hottest team in baseball in the last 2 months. So it's not a surprise here because they had their slump in May. Now
Yeah, they
that
were
is a
now looking good
now
at the All-Star break.
at the All Star break they were awful. At the end of May, end of June they were awful. Uh, because Manny Machado probably had the worst stretch of his career for those first couple of months. I trust him. Trust me. I had him in fantasy. He wasn't doing great.
Yeah.
He goes from having like a .55 OPS and he finishes with like a .8. So he really got himself back. Xander Bogaerts was pretty much He would be been unplayable on any other team. I know he's on. He didn't look that great on paper this season, but if you saw the way he started versus the way he finished, it was light years difference in just the way he was able to hit and the way he was able to field. It was really something to see. Watch him develop over this time. So, Padres clearly the hottest team in baseball, if not one of the hottest teams in baseball, and the Braves are on the other end of this. If you're an Atlanta Brave fan, what do you do from here?
It's tough because you had so many injuries. Sale gets hurt the week of the before the day before the Mets series, where they were going to throw him in one of those two games in the doubleheader. That officially ruled him out for the divisional series, and they really could have used him, especially in game one, if they weren't able to throw him at least in that doubleheader against the Mets. They also have Ronald Acuna, as we know, was out for the entire season. Sean Murphy was out for a good amount of time. So was Michael Harris. So was Ozzy Albies. They lost Austin Riley for the entire season. It wasn't as if the Braves. This is not the roster on hand that they were going into the season with. They just had to unfortunately make some other moves to try to fill in those slots. Guys like Ramon Laureano or Gio Urshela were just guys that they had to plug and play because of the injuries that they had. And then you even saw in the rotation what happened for them in this series. They had to go to Max Fried in game two. He's usually their number one starter other than Chris Sale. But in game number one, they weren't able to go to one of their top starters. So they had to throw with, I think it was Shaw Schuster that started in that first game.
It
And
was.
I don't know exactly where they go from here. I think they're also in a tough spot because, at least for them, they've gotten their championship. So they were able to get a ring with some of this group. But at the same time, you traded for Sale in the offseason because you were trying to get another ring. You had that big collapse in the midway point of the season where, your other division rival, the Mets, were starting to really pick it up. And they couldn't really catch ground from the Phillies, who really ended the season on a really bad note. And if they were able to win some of their series down the stretch, maybe could have made a bid for a division title. But I don't know. They're just kind of in that middle of a spot where I think if you get those guys back from injury and they're back to their, old selves and they're back to their peak, then the Braves will probably be competing for a playoff spot again. The question is going to be, are they going to be competing for a championship next season? I don't know. Their bullpen is definitely, to me, the biggest weak point because you saw it in that Mets game, the game one of the doubleheader. They had that game pretty much won after they originally blew it and they came back to take the lead. But the bullpen was the reason they lost that game. And they could have had them, could have given themselves a little bit of a breather going into game number 2 and said they had to be the ones to win that game too. But, you know, like I mentioned, I'm not sure. They're just kind of a weird team in a weird spot of, what their outputs and what their outlook's going to look like for this upcoming offseason. Do you keep some of your guys? Do you maybe want to try to unload and maybe not rebuild, but at least get some, assets for some of your current veterans? And then you still have your guys like Albies and Acuna that could still be the faces of your franchise and could still lead you to a potential playoff berth next season. So we'll see what they do in the offseason, but I don't know. I know obviously for you, you're okay with the Braves being in the spot
It's a
because,
Christmas Day. This happening to this organization.
but Johnson, as I mentioned, the first 3 series that we had in the wild card series were all sweeps, and that would lead us to the most thrilling series of this entire wild cards weekend, and that was between the Mets and the Brewers. Let's paint the picture for what happened in this series before we break down what happened last night in game number 3. So in game number 1, we saw the Mets take an early lead, or excuse me, the Brewers took an early lead, 2-0. The Mets would rally back for 3 runs to regain the lead. They gave back up the lead in the 4th inning. They were down 4-3 going into the 5th. They put up 5 runs in that 5th inning. Decent start for Luis Severino in this game. They really got to the Brewers bullpen in that 5th inning, and that would give them the win. They take game 1, 8-4, and had a chance to do what all the other teams were doing on Tuesday, on Wednesday, and that was to sweep the series and move on to the divisional series. But the bullpen once again plays a factor into the series, and unfortunately for the Mets, it was their bullpen that was on the downside of things in this game number 2. 3-2 lead going into the 8th inning. Jackson Chourio hits a home run to tie the game at 3, and then a couple batters later, Garrett Mitchell hits a pinch hit 2-run homer off of Phil Maydon, gives the Brewers a 5-3 lead, and they would hold on to that game 2 win by the final of 5-3, which would set us up last night, Johnson, for the do or die win, and you're in game 3 between this Mets and Brewers team. Phenomenal start for both guys. Tobias Myers and Jose Quintana. You would not have expected a pitcher's duel going into the 7th inning. That's exactly what you got in this one. Both starters go 6 shutout innings, keep the game scoreless going into the 7th. But again, the bullpen is where everything played into a factor in this game. Bottom of the 7th, the Brewers get back-to-back home runs, pinch hit home run from Jake Bowers, solo home run from Sal Frelick off of Jose Butto, gives the Brewers a 2-0 lead. And Johnson, I think you and I maybe, we're thinking, oh no, here we go again with the Mets, unfortunately. Like a Cinderella run. It looks like, maybe they were going to be able to pull this one off. And it just, unfortunately, those 2 home runs probably are the dagger in their season. But lo and behold, we still had 6 outs to play for the Mets. 9th inning comes around. We see Lindor get a leadoff single after Vientos strikes out. We saw a base hit from Brandon Nimmo. Sets up 1st and 3rd for the Mets. 1 out in the inning. Devin Williams, the all-star closer, on the mound for the Brewers, looking for a 2nd straight save after saving game number 2. And lo and behold, despite what he would probably consider to be a really bad season on his part in terms of statistical categories, Pete Alonso hits a 3-run home run the opposite way, gives the Mets a 3-2 lead. They would attack for another run later on in that inning. All this off of Devin Williams. They go up into the 9th inning, up 4-2. David Peterson, their starter, would come in relief to get the save. They used Edwin Diaz to get them out of the 7th and 8th inning. So Peterson comes into the game, gets a game-ending double play to seal the win. and give the Mets a thrilling 4-2 win, their second thrilling win of this entire week after that game we saw on Monday as well against Atlanta. And the Mets defy all the odds once again, and they are moving on to the National League Divisional Series, and they'll take on a division rival in the Philadelphia Phillies.
You have to believe if you're a Mets fan. I said that the Mets have said this about the Padres. They are one of the hottest teams in baseball. They get to the postseason by clinching in game 161, and if not, there was not a single Mets fan going into that game that thought, "Oh, we have this in the bag." They were ready to get hurt again, just like it was in 2022. They were not looking forward to this at all. When the Brewers came back, you had to believe, oh well, that was it for the Mets. They should have had it in that game. They're kind of dead on arrival now. They're just gonna kind of hang out. Maybe they make this game competitive. And when you go into the seventh inning and those two home runs go off back to back, it's really disheartening. I mean, it's just a complete game changer. And then you could have heard a pin drop in Milwaukee when Pete Alonso hit that home run. Pete Alonso might have saved his career as a Met going into this season. It was it was a strong possibility that he was going to get $200 million to be a Met for life. And then if you asked me this question 4 days ago, I would have said absolutely not. That's not going to happen. And it's crazy
Everyone was
how
expecting
one
him to hit
home
a double
run.
play.
Yeah, everyone. It is crazy how everyone was expecting him to hit a double play. He hadn't hit a extra base hit since the middle of September. Devin Williams doesn't give up home runs. You had everything here going against the Mets, a recipe for disaster for the Mets. But for one moment, he gave a meatball up, and Pete Alonso not only saved the Mets season, he may have saved his career with the Mets because every fan 24 hours ago before this game was ready to move on from Pete. Yep, time to try something different. Something's got to change here. And now all of a sudden, they're going to want him in pinstripes for the rest of his life. It's crazy how fickle baseball fans can be, but it's something to behold here.
You could always change your career at the change of a dime. There was a while for, I think maybe it may not be the best example, but there was a while for Yankee fans where they wanted A-Rod gone because of how many bad postseasons he had, and then credit there might have been some.
When 09 happens.
There might have been some stuff he was doing on the outside that probably helped him propel him in that 09 playoffs.
Yeah,
obviously.
Obviously.
He had a phenomenal postseason, and everyone, was like, "Oh, I forgive you. I'm so happy you're a Yankee. Thank you for bringing us a championship." Everyone was pretty, not saying that that's obviously what Alonso's doing. I'm not implying that whatsoever. But
absolutely not.
Alonso absolutely changes everything that could happen now this offseason. Mets fans, were saying, "Listen, love you, Pete. Happy what you've done for the organization, but
thanks for the memories. Season, time to move on.
This season just was not it. You just had a really bad year. You were injured for a little bit. It just was not working for them. He even dropped a pop up in that seventh inning where it would have ended the inning, and if not, for Diaz getting out of the seventh, the Mets could have been an even further hole, and
that's crazy too.
All that could be a moot point.
On paper, Alonso didn't have that bad of a season. If you said blind ranking, here's a guy, 90 runs, 90 RBIs, 30-plus home runs, 150 hits, and 600 at-bats, batting .250. You would take that guy, right?
Yeah.
OPS plus a 123, you would take that, right?
I think it's just because of what's, the same...
What's expected.
Yeah.
He's not the Pete Alonso of 2022.
Right, and this is where it comes down to, because obviously his rookie year, 53 home runs, breaks the rookie record for most home runs in the season that was set by Aaron Judge originally. And, that's where everyone was everyone was obviously hoping he would get back to. Even
let's not look at the COVID year. Let's not look at the COVID year, because the COVID year is just whatever.
Had an MVP type of year. Great season for him. Last year, it
46
was kind of
home
up
runs.
And down. Hit a lot of home runs, but the batting average was way, way down from the year prior. And then this year, it was kind of, middling out, 240 batting average. Did hit a good amount of home runs. The RBIs were down a bit, but he did play in every single game for the Mets. So that was another big thing for them, at least durability-wise. But there would be the plays in the field, where there were some head scratchers. Remember, even in, I think it was game number 2, where he tripped over his own bat that cost the Mets a run in that spot. So I think that's where, it was just stuff like that where the Mets were, Mets fans would say, "Listen, we love you, but I don't know how much more we can roll with it. We have guys like Vientos that they might consider moving to first base. Maybe they just do that and we just roll with the punches. And I thought about it, and it's a great point that everyone has mentioned for this home run. Obviously everyone remembers the home run that got him the record in the rookie season that put him in his own category. But this is by far the biggest home run, not only of his career, but one of the biggest home runs in Mets history. Um, because the season, as I mentioned, has been so magical for them. It's a season that you don't expect out of the Mets, and normally you don't really root for the New York teams. Like you mentioned earlier with the Yankees, no one's really rooting for them. The Mets are at that point where everyone is starting to root for them. They're
It's an
just a
underdog
scrap,
story.
they're just a very scrappy team. Like I mentioned with the Tigers, that on paper no one was expecting them to make it this far. Remember how they started the season? In May, early May, it looked like everyone was going to be traded. They were going to trade Alonso away. They were probably going to maybe fire Mendoza in his first year. Lindor was having a horrific start to the season, and they just turned it all around. Lindor has an MVP year. Mendoza probably wins the NL Manager of the Year the way this season has gone.
And you know what? Being down double digit games in May will do that to a franchise. It will do that
Right,
to a fan base.
right. And listen, like I said, like the Mets were not expecting the season. The year prior, they had traded away guys like Scherzer and Verlander. So they were saying, "Up, here we go again. We're set. We just sold. The season's over. Next season's not is a wash. We're not expecting anything. Hopefully, we get Juan Soto in 2024, which is still a very good possibility. Who knows? The bidding war between the New York teams in the offseason is going to be, as a lot of people will say, cinema between those two. So we'll have to see what happens. But happy for Mets fans. I know a lot of people on here on the show or listeners of the show are Met fans, so we are very happy that they are able to win that series and move on. And now a fun series for them against the Philadelphia Phillies coming up. But other than that, Johnson, just heartbreak for I do want to mention for Milwaukee. A heartbreaking way to end the season because they led the division the entire year. You mentioned it earlier on, a team that was in the division lead the entire season, and because of, the Phillies and the Dodgers being better than them on paper, hell, if you look at it, if they were in the American League, they would be in a bye right now. They would not have to play in the wild card series. But because of them being in the NL and, facing teams like, having the Dodgers and Phillies ahead of you, they had to play in the wild card series. And they unfortunately ran into this hot Mets team at the wrong time. And they were just 2 outs away from moving on to the NLDS against Philadelphia, and instead, they're now going home with a lot to look at going into the offseason.
And I think you kind of summed it up well here. So I think that really gives us move us into our second part of the show here. We can go into the mushing hour. But I think there's
Yeah,
some news you want to go over before that.
there is some quick news. So obviously, a very interesting week for the Reds. We talked about Pete Rose's passing the last time we were on the show, but they did make a new move and manager for the current franchise, and a very stunning one, Johnson. Kind of one that you and I were both caught off guard when we saw the news originally. Former Red Sox manager as well as Cleveland Guardian manager as of late, Terry Francona, the newest manager of the Cincinnati Reds, gets a 3-year contract. We had thought Terry Francona was done with managing after he retired, after he looked like he was retiring after his stint with Cleveland, but lo and behold, he now becomes the Reds manager. A very young group in Cincinnati currently going on. So, we talked about it. If you're a Reds fan, I guess with this young squad, you got to be a little bit happy that you're getting a guy like Francona that obviously knows how to win in October, 2 world championships with the Red Sox, and almost got Cleveland a championship as well back in 2016. And now he gets back to Ohio, but on the other side of Ohio, as he now becomes the new manager of Cincinnati.
Yeah, this is a great move by them. I can't say I saw it coming, but
Definitely did not see it coming.
yeah, I thought he was be done, but he's got some pedigree and maybe could whip this young roster into shape. So it's gonna be interesting to see what he can do here.
Yeah, so we'll have to see. But speaking now of his former team, the Cleveland Guardians, Johnson, let's now move in to the final part of our show, and that is, of course, our mushing hour. Now, not a great start to the postseason for me. I did say, however, that in the Mets and Brewers series, I wanted the Mets to win. So for them, I would pick Milwaukee to ensure that they would get the victory. I would like to think maybe I had a smidge of a part at helping the Mets win that series. I'm not taking anything for granted in this. You were able to pick 2 series right on the dot, the Mets and the Padres sweep.
Which is impressive, by
It
the
was
way. That
very
doesn't really
impressive
happen.
for a postseason, Mark. Uh, and we both mushed Atlanta, Houston and Baltimore in their series. Am I upset by that? Absolutely not. I'm, kind of laughing at the part that the fact that the Tigers in the World. So we had talked about the last show. Maybe you could make the case maybe shouldn't be in the playoffs because of how bad the White Sox were, but here they are now, one of the remaining four teams in the American League with a chance to go to the ALCS on the line. So, speaking of Cleveland, let's start off with their series. They take on the division rivals, the Detroit Tigers, in the ALDS. The Guardians, we mentioned, having, one of the better rotations in all baseball. Jose Ramirez had a great season. We saw Emmanuel Clase. He's got to be the best closer remaining in this entire playoffs. But as we know, Johnson, this Tigers team is very scrappy, and they can maybe pull off this stunning upset over Cleveland. Who do you have in this ALCS or ALDS? Excuse me.
In a scrappy 5-game series, gotta give me the home team here. Give me Guardians for 2.
I like it. I like it. I remember I picked the Guardians in our last show to make the World Series, and that's also because I'm trying not to mush the Yankees as much as I can. But I do think, unfortunately, like I said, I like this Tigers team. I just think the Guardians on paper are just a little bit better. Even you could make the same case that what happened the last series with Houston. I just think Cleveland's pitching is going to get to the Tigers, and I think the Guardians have just enough firepower in their offense to win this series. I will go with Cleveland to win this series, and I will also, and I'm going to go with them in 4 games. I think they get this done in Detroit in game number 4. So give me Cleveland in 4. Now, the next series is also staying in the American League, and that is between the Kansas City Royals and my New York Yankees. I am a little bit nervous about this series, Johnson. I'm not going to lie. Anytime the Yankees postseason come around, I know I'm ready to embrace potential heartbreak, considering what has happened the last couple of years. But maybe the only bright spot for me is that Houston is no longer in the postseason, so maybe this is the time of the year that the Yankees can finally get it done. What do you think about this series with Kansas City?
All right, so I'm gonna paint the picture for you here.
Okay.
It's the bottom of the ninth.
Mm-hmm.
Bases empty. It's a tie game, and out to the plate comes Jazz Chisholm.
Oh no! Of course,
Jazz Chisholm
Jazz.
at third base this year has a .85 OPS, is what she's gonna be playing for the Yankees, right?
Yeah,
He's been hot in the months of August, and he cooled down a little bit in September, but he still had he's been very hot the last
he
couple
was very
months.
big for us. He was very big for us.
In a full count, or in a 3-1 count, Jazz is going to blast it. He's going to hit a home run to send the Yankees into the next round. Yankees win this series for 2.
Oh man, so you think it's a Game 5
As
walk-off
a
home
game
run for
5
Jazz?
walk-off home run, Jazz Chisholm. Book
Oh,
it. I
my
got
heart
the
would
script.
my heart would not be able to take that, Johnson. I'm telling you right now, if that actually happens,
But
I will.
that's why it's going to happen. It's going to give every New Yorker a heart attack, but you're still going to complain in the end. So,
They're gonna have to
uh,
check. They're gonna have to check the heart. They're gonna have every hospital in New York like ready this
cardiology
next couple of
departments
weeks
are going to be
because
stacked.
now all of the Yankees are gonna be going through this. The Mets are also gonna be going through this in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I don't know.
Consult your local cardiologist if you're a New Yorker between the hours of 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. This Saturday.
I do think Kansas City gets a game, maybe even 2. This might go 5 games also. I really have a bad feeling it might go 5. I will pick the Yankees in 4. I really am banking on the fact that, they got Garrett Cole pitching in game 1. Going off of previous experience, Cole has been solid for the Yankees in the playoffs, especially in recent memory. I am a little bit concerned what happens after Cole. Rodon had a very solid season. He'll pitch game number 2. I might be at game number 2. I'll have to see if I'm going to that game or not. I'm still debating that. But after the first 2 starters, that's where I get a little bit worried about this team. You might throw Luis Hill in game number 3. You might start Marcus Stroman. They lost Nestor Cortez for the series. They could have used him. So after the first 2, that's where I get a little bit worried. I think we see the Yankees lose game 3. I think they take the first 2, and I think we see Garrett Cole probably pitch game number 4. They might even throw Stroman out there and go a little bit of a bullpen game in game 4. But I think they get it done in Kansas City. So give me the Yankees a 4 to win that series. Hopefully, I'm not going to mush them by saying that. Now, let's move into the National League side of things. And let's start off with, as I mentioned, the New York Hospitals got to be ready for this entire next week. The Mets and the Phillies take on each other in the NLDS. Johnson, do the Mets keep this up, or is their time going to be running out?
All right, paint this picture. It's at the bottom of
Oh, here
the
we go.
ninth. in Philadelphia.
But the Phillies coming up the bat. Yeah.
The Phillies are coming up the bat. They're down by 1 run,
Oh, they're down a run. Okay.
and they got a man on first,
Oh
and
no.
Nick Castellanos is going to step up to the plate.
I smell double play ball.
It's not a double play ball. Nick Castellanos is a clear double play ball to Frankie Lindor, but he's going to trip, and the run is going to score. Phillies 3-2 here. It's a curveball.
I am stunned. I did not think you were going with the Phillies.
Phillies 3-2. I want the Mets to win this. I do want the Mets to win this. I would rather see the Philadelphia,
I know you would
Phillies organization, just completely cease to exist. You know, the FBI and the IRS get together to indict them on tax fraud and war crimes.
I will say this is going to be
But it's not going to happen.
Here's a
This is
great
going to be
question
very
for you,
toxic.
Johnson.
This is going to be the most toxic series. This is going to be way more toxic than Padres Dodgers because
That's exactly what I was
people
gonna ask
on the
you.
West Coast are civilized. We are
Are
not
they,
civilized here. And no, on the okay. Do you think the cities of do you think cross-state rivalry between the Bay Area and LA is going to be more vile than New Yorkers and Philadelphians? I don't believe so.
I've seen a lot of fights in stands, not obviously there, but on YouTube. You know, with Dodger fans, Padre fans, and even in the NFL, you know, that's probably for different reasoning. But the Padres and Dodgers are also very hostile.
Do you know why that makes the news?
Well,
because if one of those happened, it's a big deal. Probably 15 of those happen every single game that Phillies and the Mets play together.
That is true.
So if that happens, that's like a shock over. It's like, oh my god,
yeah, that's true.
It's Tuesday over here and on the East Coast when that happens.
It's a normal Tuesday. You and I are going to be having a fun Saturday watching not only the Mets game, but then the Yankees game is right after that. It's going to be.
I'll be there watching it in person.
Yeah, that would be a very hectic time. I might need a lot of alcohol watching that entire day. I'm just going to tell you that right now off the bat. Now, going into the series, Johnson, I have to think about what I'm going to do because the last series, I didn't want to mush the Mets because you picked the Mets. The question's going to be, if I pick the Mets, am I mushing them to win? Or if I pick Philadelphia, is that helping further the Mets win because we both took them? That's what I have to consider for this spot. Now, looking at this as a whole, I think the Mets... now, the Phillies on paper are the better team. That there's no doubt about it. The Mets, to me, right now, are just riding this wave of momentum. They've been red hot. I don't know how you realistically could pick against them. I'm going to go with the Mets in 5. I think they get this done in Philadelphia. I think they stun the world once again. I'm banking right now. I think, a lot of people might not want this, Johnson. There is a very good realistic opportunity for there to be a Subway Series in the World Series this year. This could be
a real possibility.
It might not only be a Subway Series.
The Juan Soto Olympics.
Exactly. It might be the Juan Soto sweepstakes to see who gets them at the end of the year. Not only do you get a world championship, but you potentially get Juan Soto afterwards. That might be the case this way as October's going. So I have the Mets winning at 5. Hopefully I'm not mushing them, but I think they can get this done. I think they are playing some great baseball. And I forgot to mention, Johnson, we found this out today. Kodai Senga is going to pitch game 1 for the Mets, so they get another starter in that rotation that gives their bullpen and the rest of their stars a little bit of more, rest. So that is definitely helpful for New York going into this postseason against the Phillies. And the Phillies have been off for a little bit. They haven't played since Sunday, so you got to wonder if the rest
could be a little bit rusty.
Yeah, you got to wonder if the rust is going to play for them. That's why I'm worried about the Yankees and their series with Kansas City. I don't know what's going to happen, but for the Mets, this is a perfect opportune time for them to pull off this upset. Now, we already kind of talked about this series also being very hostile, but let's see what happens. The Padres have had the Dodgers' number, Johnson, the last couple of years in the postseason. Do they have their number once again, and will they move on to the NLCS?
So I do want to point out there are some. This is some breaking news that Joe Musgrove is going to miss the NLDS with Tommy John surgery now. So that is
Tommy
awful.
John.
Yes, Tommy John.
Really? I did not know it was Tommy John.
He's not even going to pitch probably in 2025. Oh, yeah, you may see him in 2026. So that is heartbreaking for a Padres fan. You really have to win this. So now with this pressure mounting here,
now, yeah.
Give me Padres 3-2 because you're not going to have another opportunity for this. You want him with this core together to win a World Series. This is the best chance you're going to have it. You're going to have to beat the boogeyman. You're going to have to beat the Dodgers and do it for Joe. Padres win this series 3-2. I have all these series going 3-2, by the way.
I would be. I'm telling you right now, if every series goes 3-2, you have to go hit the lottery because there's most of the time that does not happen.
If I can get two of these right, I'd be very happy.
I think there's a really good possibility you get two of them because there's not much that differentiates each team playing each other. Like I mentioned
This
going
is
into
very
this,
well balanced. This is a
like I
well balanced
mentioned
playoff bracket.
going into our wild card preview. This is the most wide open baseball season we've ever had. Anyone realistically right now, out of the 12 teams we originally had, anyone could have made their case to win the World Series. Now we're down to 8, and each 8 teams have a realistic shot of winning a championship this year. Now, the last show I picked the Dodgers over Cleveland in my World Series. Do I want that to happen? Absolutely not. I would rather see a Subway Series if that were to happen. Now, you have taken the Padres already, so I don't want to mush San Diego because let's face facts, Johnson. I would rather have the Padres win this series over the Dodgers. I cannot stand another potential Dodgers World Championship, even if we quote unquote call it the Mickey Mouse ring in 2020. So for that reason, I will take the Dodgers in 5 games to win it. There is a concern about the rotation because they are still very injured. I think they're going with Flaherty and Yamamoto in games 1 and 2, respectively. I don't know where they go after that for game number 3 and potential 4. So that is a little bit worrying if you're a Dodgers fan going into the series. I think the Padres have a better chance of winning just because they're riding a wave of momentum and they are one of the highest teams in baseball. And they probably have, a lot of people would say, maybe the best bullpen in baseball. But I think for me, I don't want to mush San Diego into losing. I will take the Dodgers respectively to win this series in 5, and hopefully the Padres can pull it out. So now, unfortunately, Johnson, for you, your World Series prediction was officially eliminated from the preseason after the Astros were eliminated this weekend. Who do you have now making the World Series in your most recent updated version?
I'm gonna scrap the whole thing. Go Padres over Yankees now.
Okay, the old another Juan Soto Bowl, technically his former team.
Yeah, Juan Soto Olympics for this one too.
Yeah. Again, for me, I'm gonna just keep my pick. I have Dodgers over Guardians. I'm gonna keep it like that. And like
You
I
gotta
said,
roll with that since you already
right,
got it.
I would rather, but like I said, I would rather it be the reverse side for each team. I would rather have a Yankees Mets World Series. That's obviously what I want. Do I want to put it in paper and set in stone? Absolutely not, because I'm not trying to mush it. Because as we said from our not even our MLB picks, but how our NFL season has gone, at least to start the year, I don't want to put that into setting in stone that I'm going to fully mush it and then cost these teams a chance. So I would rather it just be the opposite teams that I want in there, and we'll see if it helps both New York teams make it to a potential fall classic for the second time in MLB history. But that's going to do it for our mushing hour this week, Johnson. We'll see how we do for the MLB Divisional Series. As I mentioned, a very long week for us, our 4th episode of the week. But we're right doing so. We'll be right back here next week for NFL and college football. And once the divisional series wrap up, we will be recapping those series as well as previewing the championship series in MLB baseball. And as I mentioned, we also have the NBA season coming up very shortly. So I know you are very much looking forward into that. A lot of news to break down, especially a big trade that happened just recently. But any final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
I want competent baseball, so I just hope the better team wins. I don't want to see I don't want to see two teams just completely throw up on the field. I want to see good, clean baseball games. And we should eliminate the pitch clock for the postseason. That's also my opinion. But
At least there's no Ghost Runner, right? At least they don't
yeah, I
have a
mean,
Ghost
I'll
Runner.
take that. But
Yeah.
that's me bargaining right now. So I'm gonna stop.
I don't hate it as much, but you know what I will say? I don't think they're doing any more games on ESPN. I think that's over. The one gripe I had with the Wildcard series, the amount of weird timing ads and interviews they had during this entire series, like the entire postseason series in general. That was pissing me off. Like there was what was it, game 2 with the Mets? Garrett Mitchell hits the home run, and then during an at bat where Jose Iglesias, they immediately interview him, so they missed the entire at bat and they caught the very tail end of it. That was so annoying. So I'm just hoping that I think ESPN's done broadcasting for this postseason, so I think I'm very grateful for that. But I'd be also grateful to see what happens in this divisional series and what's going to come down. Hopefully, my Yankees get the job done And maybe we'll see what the Mets do as well for us New Yorkers here. We're trying to see if maybe we get that Fall Classic and Subway Series in the next couple of weeks. But that's going to do it for this week's edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. The Wildcard Series is now done. We now head to the Divisional Series in the MLB. Tigers and Guardians, Royals and Yankees, Mets and Phillies, Padres and Dodgers. We started with 12. We're down to 8. At next time we will be recording, we will be down to 4 teams remaining in this MLB postseason. Who will move on to the respective championship series? You have to tune in and find out. This has been Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside by Andrew Johnson with the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your week.